Hey, what's up, everybody? Brian here, coming to you with a live video with Roman Hanis of Peru's Paititi Institute, and he should be joining us here shortly. How's everyone doing out there? So we're going to be talking about the Paititi Institute um, and kind of what they're all about. Kind of introduce you to Roman. Talk a little bit about how he ended up down in Peru, um, and then how he ended up starting the institute and his nonprofit, um, which is all about sustainability and preserving the environment and raising global consciousness and development. So, should be a really interesting interview. I'm feeling a little nervous. Let's see, I got Gail out there. I'll say hi. And I'm not sure who that is. I have such a hard time reading my kids' names from Myanmar. I haven't had nicknames for them all. Suizin Hin is watching. It's good to see you. Thanks for joining us. But yeah, so Paititi, I was just reading about it. I've been reading about it a little bit for the last couple of weeks since I've been talking to Roman about his institute. Oh, here he is. Let's see if we can add Roman. Bring Roman Hennis on camera. Yes. And he's adding right now. Hi. There he is.
Hey Brian,
How's it going, Roman?
it's going well. How are you?
I'm good. It looks like my camera's a little bit dark. Just try moving here. There we go. Um,
Uh-huh.
what's going on with you today? I was just doing a little introduction. I was
Uh-huh.
about to read the definition in Quechua of Paititi, which I was just reading about.
Mhm.
I was really touched by that. So the definition of Paititi in Quechua is an enlightened realm manifested through the awakening of our shared human heart. I think
Mhm.
that's pretty amazing. And I think that's a good
Mhm.
place to start.
Mhm. Yeah, the local people refer to it as the heart of all the hearts.
The heart of all the hearts. Can you say more about that?
Well, apart from what you just shared, Paititi has been recognized as this enlightened realm. Some people interpret it in a more literal way as this kind of El Dorado, which is a city that is hidden in the rainforest just behind the mountain that our center is located. But the elders refer to it really as this portal into the realm of enlightened ancestors, a realm where there is great love abiding and people can connect and relate to each other in a very profound way, in a way that eliminates all the diseases and sicknesses and conflicts. And this is something that the legend tells is essential for our life as human beings and something for us to remember and bring back into the world.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm really getting about your institute. I mean, in this day and age, um, well, I mean, we haven't really gotten into um, like what you define your institute as, other than why don't you give us a brief description of how you would describe it? Because you have a nonprofit you've started as well, right? As you were just sharing, because you're
Mhm.
about more than just providing wellness and healing and support for people, just individuals. It's kind of what I'm taking away is it's kind of looking at the whole earth as one living organism, and so
Mhm.
um, and like the people included, and we're all kind of one living, breathing organism. And correct me if I'm wrong. And just reading over some of your stuff on the website, and just your kind of your three tiered kind of approach of consciousness, stewardship, and healing. But yeah, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I initially came to this indigenous cultures in 2001, and the main motivation I had at that time was an illness that I was dealing with, which was considered to be genetic and incurable in Western medicine, in many cases terminal. And
you had this illness.
then
you said you had
what is that?
You had an illness that was terminal. Wow. Okay.
Right. And the main intention that I had was to really resolve this illness and understand the causes of it, so that it can be resolved to its root. And then as I began working with these traditions, and essentially these traditions were a continuation of a path of realization that I was already on, working with the transpersonal psychology, recognizing the causes of the psychosomatic cause of this condition. And then also working with the indigenous wisdoms from other parts of the world that includes the northern Native American tradition that I was just starting to get a glimpse of, and then also the Tibetan lineages that also brought me on this path of consciousness and the recognition of the spiritual path as the consciousness of science.
So can I
and
that so far you said, so you had a terminal disease, you were saying, like, pretty much, or okay.
Yeah.
And then that led you to pursuing spiritual works, inner work, healing, and that's kind of what brought you down to Peru, or?
Yeah, that was the catalyst in my own life. And then coming to the indigenous traditions here, of course, that was a continuation of that. And then starting to work with these traditions and recognizing this certain living wisdom that the elders, the lineage holders in these traditions were cultivating. And then starting to see that this living wisdom is something that has been cultivated through many generations, through thousands of years, and it is the result of many individuals that put their collective focus and intention into this recognition of something that we all share, something that is universal, those qualities that allow us to become more complete human beings in a human body. This embodiment of heart-centered presence.
Of what presence?
And heart-centered presence.
Presence. Okay. So it's that
and
the heart-centered presence, or what did you say again? The catch one say that's the only heart, or the true heart, or
the heart of all the hearts.
The heart of all hearts. So it's kind of the same kind of heart you're talking about. A heart-centered.
And so the cultivation of this tradition, cultivation of this path initially allowed me to resolve the illness that I had and come to a full remission of it. It took me about 8 months after I came down here to Peru. And then throughout the years, that was, of course, the physical resolution of the illness was just the tip of the iceberg of a deeper process, which continues to this day and for which I'm very grateful. And so then the continuous cultivation of that, after about 9 years or so, then resulted in the creation of the Paititi Institute, which I co-founded with my beloved wife. And when we co-founded the Paititi Institute, my wife, she's been dedicating at least as many years as I was to the indigenous healing traditions. She was dedicated to the permaculture practices and
Did
the
you guys meet?
science of permaculture.
You guys met?
What is that?
You two met in Peru, or?
We actually met in the US first, and then for about a year we were good friends and started to collaborate and see different possibilities. And then that resulted in us co-founding the institute, which was based on this marriage of the indigenous wisdom and permaculture, so that this original primordial state of being that the ancestors were so dedicated to can actually be brought into the world today and continue to be cultivated in a more practical way.
Yeah, I'm just really appreciating like this, you know, you and your wife like creating this together. And tell me her name again. I'm sorry.
Cynthia.
Cynthia. And so this is kind of a synthesis of like both of your kind of hearts. How did you and how did this kind of I imagine it's kind of evolved over the years, like you're kind of I guess you're calling this the Paititi's true nature. I mean, was it almost, when I read it, it was kind of like, it almost seemed like something that just was like almost like a download, or like some kind of like it really just jumped off the page to me. Yeah, through the awakened spirit of the individual comes the greatest potential for transformation of the planet. Yeah, and then talking about your kind of five categories that you really focus on: conserving and restoring the Earth's natural resources, preserving and integrating indigenous wisdom and culture, cultivating health through traditional and natural methods, embodying true stewardship via eco-regenerative community living, and understanding consciousness and engaging in cognitive evolution. I'd love to unpack like each of those. But like I get a sense that there's like, yeah, you both shared in those, you know, like you mentioned the permaculture, and then the spirituality and this kind of ancient wisdom combined with preservation and yeah, permaculture. It's lovely. So conserving and restoring the Earth's natural, actually what really stood out, embodying true stewardship via eco-regenerative community living. So that was one thing that really I'm interested in, is it's an intentional community and there's people that live there year round. Is that true? Or?
Yeah, throughout the year we have the steady group of people that are living in our center and are caretaking the place. And then at different times we have different initiatives, different programs, retreats and workshops where people come and then live in a community for different periods of time, maybe 2 weeks or 1 month or 7 weeks, so that we have temporary communities that are created during those times. And then with the help of the indigenous wisdom and different modern social technologies, we can see very powerful examples of a sense of community that can be created in a relatively short period of time. And then we have the core team that is there throughout the whole time, and then we can cultivate deeper and deeper facets of this relatedness and authentic connection that we can then share with the more temporary communities that come over.
I have a question here on this particular topic. It's a friend of mine, Gail. She's actually a yoga teacher in Telluride, Colorado. Hey, Gail. She says, how many people can the community host, and what does it cost to come and stay?
Well, throughout the year, like I said, we have the steady group of people that are at the land, which is our main community, and it's 8 people right now. And then we have different initiatives and programs. Now, the staying in the community, we have different ways that people can come and develop a relationship with us. And this is something that we've been really cultivating and applying in our communities, this recognition how essential it is to develop a relationship, to develop a connection. There are many communities that are formed all over the world, and many of them last for only so long. And so then seeing what is it really that makes the community last, and then recognizing that actually this relatedness and connection, and not just seeing that we have maybe the common purpose or goal and then coming together, but learning how to take the time and relate to each other as human beings. And so for us, this quality is much more essential than quantity. And then initially, different people, we have work-study service programs that people come to and then start to see really what we are about. Because of course, I can talk about it, but it's really through this shared presence that it becomes more tangible. And so,
sounds like there's like many different options. So there's people, core staff. I mean,
there are many different options.
Yeah. And
so
then,
where there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah.
You know, and this is something that I see that, yeah, if there is really a connection, then people find a way for us to relate and connect. And
so here's, as far as
how we can
usually there's
how we can be all complementing each other,
right,
in service to that shared purpose, the greater vision.
Shared purpose of the greater vision, you said? Yeah. Cultivating that. You mentioned the work study. I know there's I've heard of similar things. So what does that entail? Like somebody comes and spends a certain amount of time and kind of helps out on staff, and then receive some sort of discount, or?
Well, the work study service program is a program that is either based on the path of the transformation, and people come and support the transformation retreats that we have, the Embody True Nature retreats. And then the other route is during the permaculture events and the permaculture certification programs that we have while we are working with our teachers that come from different parts of the world. And essentially the work study service is a program where people come and then partake in the main facets of the programs, while at the same time supporting the many different logistics and the facets of the program that need some people that are involved in actually holding the container and chopping wood or working in the kitchen. And this is also a program that we developed based on recognition how we can really develop and work on the reciprocity.
So when normal people come, or normal, sorry, I have to forgive the way I speak sometimes. So when people come, specifically maybe just to do a retreat or an education, to be like, I've done similar things, and I know you mentioned like kind of rubbing elbows with people that are working in the garden or people that are there on staff. Do people that come there and participate, say, in a plant medicine retreat for a few weeks or something, is like doing work around the community part of that experience? Like, does everyone kind of participate in some way?
Everyone is participating in different ways, right? So then the people who come into the work study service program, they participate, of course, in the gardening work and in the work that requires all kinds of different physical aspects of the retreat support, and at the same time are also participating in the main facets of the retreat, so the main talks or practices and some of the ceremonies. And the people who come as participants also have an option of engaging in some of the gardening work as part of the meditation, and engaging in the different activities at different parts of the retreat. But the retreats themselves, if we are talking about the transformation retreats, let's say, they are very, how to say, there's a very intense curriculum in this retreat.
Is it like a
And so
yeah,
it is a very rigorous curriculum, and even that is just an introduction into this work. The indigenous traditions, many people think that indigenous traditions don't involve much discipline, but actually I've never seen more discipline being a part of people's lives than in the indigenous traditions. And of course that's part of them living in very harsh circumstances with lots of challenges, and then really needing to work together and coordinate among themselves, and then coordinate and relate to each other on many levels, from the everyday mundane level to very deep soul connections.
mm-hmm.
And this is what allowed people to overcome many different challenges and difficulties in the circumstances that they lived in.
Yeah, and you work with all kinds of different, people with all kinds of different situations, illnesses, challenges going on. Can you speak to some of that, or?
Sure, we work with people who come to face themselves, and some people have different particular physical illnesses and health conditions. Some people have different traumas and challenges in their lives that they don't know how to deal with and face. And so yeah, people with a variety of different health conditions, some of them more severe than others, people with many different traumas and histories of addiction, substance abuse, violence in their lives, people who have been through very problematic experiences, and then also people who are actually dedicated to the path of evolution of consciousness. And so people from all walks of life come to us, from all ages.
Yeah, sorry, I was just like kind of got lost in your words there for a minute. I think that's a nice segue to actually to talk about kind of the subject of the conversation, which is building intercultural bridges. Because I'd imagine that you mentioned drug addiction, you mentioned several different modality or issues, and that's what the kind of subject of this talk is about, like how you've taken this ancient wisdom and refined it in a way that makes it more practically applicable to like the modern world. And I'd imagine some of that is also, say maybe for people with substance abuse issues, or maybe for people with, other, you name it. So that's something I'm really wanting to hear more about. And then, yeah, why don't you just speak on that a little bit, like the cultural bridge, and how you kind of, you explained that to me a little bit the other day. Again, I imagine it's been kind of an evolution, and it continues to be, and will always be. But yeah, if you can speak a little bit like about what that means to you, creating intercultural bridges.
Sure. Intercultural bridges essentially has to do with this universal human potential that the ancestors have been cultivating and then bringing from generation to generation as a reminder for their future generations of what is possible. And again, this is something that we all are familiar with to a certain degree, so we all know what it means to experience kindness or love or patience or vulnerability. And yet we are familiar with it to the degree that our own personal experience is allowing us to be familiar with that, while these traditions then are able to transmit on the energetic level an example of what those same states are in their fully unraveled potential. And so then, of course, just that is not enough, because it has to be then brought to one's own personal experience.
So
And
it's
so then,
ancient wisdom you were talking about that's been there and evolved over thousands of years, and now we're getting this point. How do we take that and give it to, you know, the westernized culture, modern day culture? Anyway, sorry.
well, this is not something new. This is something that has been a part of these traditions within each generation. Then new people, new generation with their own particular challenges had to really learn how to bring those universal states of being into their particular circumstances. And this is the only way how these wisdom traditions are able to survive until today, is by each individual actually embodying that essence in their own life in whatever way is relevant.
But you're saying that effort to create that bridge has always been there, like in the culture, they've always tried to kind of reach out to other cultures, or like when maybe other. Can you explain that a little bit? Is that because that, I don't know, it really
They
pinged
reached
me.
out to they reached out to the new generations.
Oh,
So
okay.
each new generation had to deal with their particular challenges. In our new generation, we have to deal with the challenge of globalization. This has not been a part of previous generations. And yet
Gotcha.
previous generations have all had certain challenges that they were particularly involved in.
Okay.
And so then within each generation, this had to be brought on an individual personal level of experience.
So you're saying this global effort is kind of, that's the new challenge, or the new you know, for the ancient wisdom, you know, it's yeah, I see. How, I know many of the people that are tuning in here are we've talked a little bit about the documentary that I'm creating, Authentic Revolution, and initially for me it was almost like it was really focused on authentic relating, or circling, some people call it, or relational leadership. And now my, you know, it's broadened a lot more to encompass a lot of other things, including communities like yours. You know, kind of more, the documentary I'm working on is now more focused on just this collective global cultural evolution and transformation that's going on. And so I'm kind of looking at lots of different communities and leaders and practices and cultures, and just really want to give the audience a lot of different flavors of what's out there, just to actually see that it's actually happening. For one thing, I think that would be really beneficial, because I think we're all kind of bombarded. I personally don't watch much of any TV, but I think even not watching that, you can't help in the States being bombarded with a lot of stuff. So I think it's important, like in this evolution, to kind of start shifting the narrative, you know, of what we're like really focusing on, you know, and focusing more on what we want versus what we don't want, you know. And I'm really interested in creating like more of an information stream and media channel, you know, focused on those kinds of things. But back to authentic relating, because I know many of the people that are following this documentary, and it is still a big part of it, and something I'm really curious about with your center, because, or with Paititi Institute, and how that plays into the building of intercultural bridges. Could you talk about that a little bit, and how I think you developed kind of your own brand of authentic relating, and then one of our, I would say, leaders in our community, Brian Bear, came down there on a retreat and shared some of his technology about what he had actually written a book called The Art of Circling, which I'd read. I have actually up on my bookshelf here, and so yeah, you can just talk a little bit about that. That would be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Like how that plays.
Well, we do our part, and like you shared, everyone who are more awake in these times are starting to do their part in that way, and this is just part of the human nature of recognizing that there is more to this life than what the current mainstream society is able to offer. And within our experience, we do recognize how this original state of being, this is again this unconditional openness and relatedness, is something that goes beyond culture, tradition, religion, and this is something that we all share. Nobody has a copyright on that. And yet, in different cultures, different traditions, there is this particular angle that is recognizing this essence in a way that makes it more objective. And so within our own practices, we work with several indigenous traditions. We work with traditions of the Amazonian rainforest. We work with the wisdom coming from the tribes of the Witoto, of the Ashuar, the Yagua, the Shipibo, and at the same time, we are also working with the Andean traditions that relate to Quechua and the Quero nations, also some of the tribes that live in high mountain rainforests, such as the Machigengas and Wachiparis. And then, of course, recognizing the same natural state of being that these indigenous traditions cultivate within their own cultural context. We are also seeing in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition that we've also been working with and cultivating, and then recognizing that actually the state of being, this natural presence, is the same in both traditions, and it is something that is not found in everyday society. This state of being is so grounded in unconditional presence within all circumstances and situations, and not giving up when things get challenging, and not running away and not distracting, which is something that is prevalent in today's world. So there is something very special that these ancient cultures are able to share with us today, something that we can recognize. And then, of course, while in these cultures, this is something that is present within their particular context, within their way of life. At the same time, it is up to each one of us to learn how to bring it into everyday existence. And so this is where our work with the transpersonal Jungian psychology has been very helpful, just translating the context, the language, and the symbols that the indigenous people are utilizing, and then seeing how it actually is pointing not just to those particular forms, to those particular customs and these traditions, but how it is very relevant to everything we're doing in our lives. That as um, and sadness, and actually the meaning of it is the same. We are all dealing with certain energetic intensities that we can learn how to recognize and then apply those unconditional human qualities to, in a way that we are no longer intimidated or bound by them. And so in that way, this intercultural bridges, they allow us to recognize how to bring that original universal human state of freedom into our current challenges and situations. So the Jungian transpersonal psychology is very helpful with that.
And
then, of course,
that's a lot about, for those who don't really know about Carl Jung, and his particular brand of focus was a lot on archetypes or energy circuits, right? Or, I mean, can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that, like how that how that is the bridge, like.
mm-hmm. Well, this is the archetypal language that Carl Jung has developed through his spending time and connecting with many different ancient cultures from around the world, and then recognizing that actually we are all still engaging in that language, although mostly unconsciously. And in each of our lives, there is this heroic journey that is taking place. We are going through the different rites of passage, different initiations into maturation and recognition of our role, not only in society, but in the universe.
Mm.
And so then in most of our lives today, this is something that is unconscious and yet still happening. In the indigenous societies,
dreams have a lot to do well.
Dreams have a lot to do with it, and more than that is the symbolic meaning of the dreams. Mm. And then, of course, it relates to our everyday life and the symbolic meaning of our everyday life. For the indigenous people, they saw that actually this is something that has to be brought into an intentional way. Otherwise, when it happens in an unintentional way, it can be a lot more difficult and destructive.
Right.
So, for example, I'll just bring a little example. When I first came to Peru in 2001, I came to Peru at first in August of 2001 from New York. And when I was in New York, and I lived there for a few years beforehand, people in New York are not were not necessarily known for their how to say
relational skills,
human relational skills or manners, maybe. And then I went to the Amazon and I partook in some of the Amazonian indigenous ceremonies that were a rite of passage for me at that time. And then going through that rite of passage with other people in the ceremonies that were held in this more nurturing, intentional container, we all felt much more connected and open to each other. And so then while I was in the Amazon, the 9/11 happened in New York. And upon me coming back to New York, and so after initially going, I came back for a few months and then moved to the Amazon for 3 years. But when I came back to New York, after my own rite of passage, I actually witnessed the whole New York area went through their own rite of passage. And because of that powerful experience, then people started to actually be a lot more kinder and supportive and open with each other. And so it was a rite of passage that took place, and yet it took place in a less intentional way. Mm. And because of that, it involved much more destruction and suffering.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it's taking place all the time, right? In everyone's journeys. But you're saying when you put more intentionality to the way you live your life, I mean, that's kind of what I'm hearing is, you know, living life from kind of your purpose, or, you know, figuring out more of drilling down what your values are, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's really what it's about, is the recognition of the values in each moment of one's life, living one's life in a more intentional way, where every moment is an opportunity to open up, to recognize each other on a deeper level, to become more patient, more generous, more vulnerable. And so this is something that we can learn a lot from these ancient traditions that have been cultivating examples of that. And so this relates to the archetypal language, not just living one's life as if it's just a random occurrence, and then not having any deeper meaning or purpose or intention, and of course then trying to avoid and hide in all kinds of experiences and instant gratifications that don't have any lasting benefit. So then this kind of life.
Do you find that a lot of them, a good portion of the people that come down to do these retreats are in that particular place? You know, some of the new ones, at least.
I find myself to be in that place.
Yeah, me too.
You know, and then we are all byproducts of the current society, and it is quite ingrained on deeper levels. With some people, it can be, you know, more visible, but this is still something. We are all interconnected with each other. We are all tuned in, and definitely it helps me to stay in this stream of the reminders that these traditions provide on the level of being, to keep returning to that, and then seeing, of course, how easy the mind tends to wander off, and then recognizing how we can all support each other in that way, and how life does become much more meaningful, how life becomes much more
I hear you.
feeling. Huh?
I can hear your boy in the background.
Yeah. My kid is being put to sleep by his mother.
And so there's the Carl Jung archetypal, you know, transpersonal psychology component, you know, which is, like you're saying, it's kind of something that's just happening all the time, and it sounds like you kind of are maybe some people's maybe first exposure to that, or kind of like teaching them how to, you know, find those values and really I like to think of it as like a contemplative kind of approach to life, you know, where you're always kind of asking questions and being curious, and then, you know, drilling down and finding what your values are. So there's that component, and then I'm still really curious about how relational leadership or authentic relating circling. I know you guys, so I imagine you guys circle up after these, you know, ceremonies and stuff like that, which, because you guys do some plant medicine ceremonies, ayahuasca, San Pedro, stuff like that, and other types of ceremonies, which sends you on, I'd imagine, like a journey. I personally have never been a part of an ayahuasca ceremony or San Pedro, so I'm just imagining things. I can't speak from experience, but I imagine, because I have experimented with other psychedelics and gone on journeys, oftentimes by myself and sometimes with other people. But I would imagine that maybe you circle up and each person would share what they experienced with each other, and that would be kind of a way that they would kind of integrate and you know, their journey, like by sharing it. And do you teach this type of like kind of authentic relating to do that part of it, or like how to, like, for instance, some of the,
Sure.
I mentioned some of the, just a couple of the essences, like owning your own experience, or assuming, you know, the highest intent in someone else, or welcoming everything and assuming nothing, or you know, honoring yourself really first and foremost, just knowing when things aren't right for you, or when you need to take care of your physical vehicle, or, you know, that kind of thing.
Sure. Community agreements is
Community
an essential part of of our work. And then, of course, within the traditions that we work with, there is an integral approach. So the particular practices, the particular piece that our institute brings into the ceremony work has to do with the integration and the greater cultural context. So beyond just the ceremonies is the recognition how everything is a part of this process, how the ceremonies, they are just a miniature version of life. And then being able to relate to each other's experiences in the ceremonies in a non-dual way, something that goes beyond just mystical and personified interpretation of it. So to be able to recognize this universal language and how underneath all the different shapes and forms and images that people may be experiencing, there is this essential journey towards openness. There is this willingness to face conflicts, and how our greater organism is communicating through each one of us essential messages that help to practice that embodied relatedness. With the community agreements in particular, there is this approach that we take where the agreements themselves, they're really more than just different agreements. It's one greater agreement. It's a certain frequency that we can cultivate and keep coming back to on deeper and deeper levels. So initially, it may just sound as words, where it's being engaged, or honoring the true self, or no gossiping. And then gradually it starts to be recognized on the level of being, on the level of a certain frequency that we can start to cultivate in our collective space together, that becomes quite tangible. So then, of course, that is something that amplified, that is enhanced through all the other work that we do, whether it's breath work, or whether it's the integration circles or the ceremonies themselves. It all points to this essential way of sharing presence with each other.
Yeah, the word that again is coming up for me is authenticity. Yeah, I mean, the one thing that popped up was non-dual. And you're mentioning in this day and age, a lot of people are going down to South America and going on journeys and things like that. And what I get from your community, your institute, just back to this authenticity, of it not being, like you're saying, just a mystical kind of state that just has a short shelf life. And then when someone goes home, maybe they, they're okay for a few weeks, and then it's kind of forgotten about. It sounds like you're really trying to create an experience for your, your visitors, your community, that's lasting. That really gets deep and deeply embedded through all these really thoughtful, authentic ways of communicating and preserving this really this ancient culture, and then refining that into this bridge that is individual, it sounds like, to each person. But
it's individual to each person in a way that each person recognizes this original unconditional state that we all know from the mother's womb, and then seeing all the many different unique qualities and talents and abilities to share that state in our own particular circumstances. And otherwise, this is something that we start to be able to resonate with each other on, and recognize that truth in each other, because each one of us knows it deep within oneself.
So we got like a little, just to kind of do a little chronology. You this journey for you started with your own, sounds extremely challenging situation with a it sounded like what you thought was going to be a terminal illness, and then that led to this inner work and spiritual pursuit and your own hero's journey down to South America, coming back to the States around the time, post 9/11, and seeing, the contrast from when you left to coming back, and that kind of archetypal role that 9/11 played. And then going down and meeting your wife and her permaculture experience and creating this amazing community. Where do you see things going, like, from here? What's next on your list of goals?
Well, this is what our conversation has been leading into, where through this individual transformation, through this recognition that actually we are all related, that there is this interconnectedness that is existing, and everyone is actually doing their part, whether they know it or not. And then starting to have more and more inspiration and willingness to do one's part more consciously. So this is how the Paititi Institute.
Finding that.
What is that?
Yeah,
I didn't hear the last part.
Finding that heart of hearts.
Yeah, very much so. And so then, of course, working through this individual conditioning, and then at a certain point, recognizing that this individual conditioning is actually a portal to the shared heart when faced and engaged with. And then from that point on, actually starting to be in service to that shared heart and seeing how the only way to resolve this collective affliction is for each individual to do their part. And
the way you put that, like every person's challenge is a would you say a portal or a gateway to the heart of hearts. It's like that's what teaches us empathy, and that's what made, like, in my experience at least, my challenges has been the greatest teacher of empathy and acceptance and curiosity, just realizing, the potential of what other people might have, be going through. Yeah. So if someone wanted, to come down for a retreat, or possibly, do a work study, or do like a permaculture certification, or even contact you for potentially, I got someone messaging me. Sorry. What would be the next step that you would recommend, for those things? Obviously you have your website, you have tons of, I've been watching all the testimonials, all the YouTubes, which are just beautiful. Tons of them on there, and everyone's just really special. So I would recommend people checking that out. I personally love just hearing other people's stories and, their personal take on Paititi. But yeah, what would you recommend, like if someone's considering doing something like this?
Well, we have many different initiatives and programs listed on our site at the paititi-institute.org. And otherwise, yeah, people can find some relevance in our talk here and some of the other talks that we have available, the articles that we have on the site. And that's a good place to start with.
Okay. And is it okay to talk about, we talked about some content you've been developing? Is that something you want to talk about?
Sure. We are continuously developing content and finding ways to share
content, maybe,
to
like,
share what we find so inspiring and motivating with the world. And so one of the programs that we've been developing is the home study course.
Okay.
And so this course encompasses a lot of this cultural context, because again, in my experience, living with the indigenous traditions and working with these lineages, it's not just this occasional experience or a ceremony, but there is this greater cultural context, and then to be able to relate to it, to recognize and learn about this language of nature, the language of the organism, the language that is coming through each moment of our lives, that is coming through not only our dreams, but it's coming through every breath that we take. And so to actually learn this language and see how the indigenous people have been working with this language, it's not a conceptual language. It's not a language of words. It's a language of being. It's a language of metaphors, of symbols, of associations, of rites of passage. And so to actually engage and recognize it then allows people to really cultivate that in every moment of their lives. And it's not just a philosophical thing, it's very practical and very tangible, and something that can be embraced in each moment beyond the conceptual process, beyond the thoughts, on the level of being, recognition that all of those sensations, emotions, feelings, existential states, they are present with each one of us in this very moment. And we can relate to them through the different symbols in our lives, through the different situations, through the different people and relationships that we are having. But essentially, this is something that is embodied. It's this vulnerability, how you relate to this authentic embodiment. And sometimes we refer to it as this bravery of vulnerability, being brave enough to be vulnerable.
Yeah, and for me, I know what really what comes up for me when I think of that is safety, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And when I read, when I when I just spend time with you more than anything, that's this feeling of peace and safety I get, and then just all the care and effort you put into creating Paititi. It feels like to me a really safe place to come and be vulnerable and explore the edges of that vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then developing this content, the online content, or what did you call it again? Like a
The home study course.
study.
I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, it's embodied through nature home study course.
Yeah, an embodiment, you know, again, that's a big part of, you know, what I'm really passionate about and really focusing on with this film is, you know, communities, cultures, practices that really invite that kind of fearlessness of heart, you know, and vulnerability, and not only welcome someone as they are, but encourage them to even go deeper and bring more of what's true for them forward, you know, and support them in that and welcome in that, even if maybe it's, you know, not their, you know, their thing, but always still committed to the relationship, you know, the focus always being on elevating the relationship versus, you know, controlling someone or what have you, or getting, you know, being right or wrong or getting what we want. But so what I was gonna say is that creating that is, it seems like your last of the five kind of, and I didn't get to these, or actually I did read through all of them, but that last one, understanding consciousness and engaging in cognitive evolution. And that's another really, you know, thing I'm focusing on with the documentary is, you know, it seems like you're taking that, your big value is taking this ancient wisdom and putting it again, like building this bridge, which in modern times, you know, is this work study or home study courses, things like that, to where people that maybe don't have the availability, even, you know, even it could be a health situation or something like that, where they just can't really make the trip down there, but they could still benefit from this ancient wisdom and guidance from your community, even at a distance, which I think is really special and really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I really see that is needed in the world today is just many different ways to relate to each other and to find that connection, and then seeing how everything can become a tool for that relatedness.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the relatedness itself is just this certain approach, this cultivation of a certain attitude. Like you shared earlier, it's not about the different experiences that we have. You know, I may have a very enlightening experience one moment, and then I may have, you know, a very difficult experience in another. And so then, rather than identifying with the experience as cultivating a certain attitude, a certain disposition to engage each experience in this open-hearted way. And then, of course, seeing how in that way we can all uplift each other, how we can all heal through each other. So each individual that is healed in my own presence in my own life then allows me to experience a deeper healing myself.
Amen to that, brother. I think that's maybe a good spot to end on right there. Yeah. You know, helping my brother, my sister heal, you know, creating that opening for them to feel safe, to be vulnerable. You know, creates a healing in myself. And I mean, that's really the essence of me to and that part of this practice. Looks like I lost Roman. Where did he go? Yeah, so I guess we're gonna close things up there. Oh, Roman wants to be, there we go. Add. You there, Roman? Oh, adding. I swear this is like Star Trek.
Disconnected for a moment.
It's like I'm beaming you up, Scotty, you know, it's like you lost you for a minute. It happened last time too.
The connection. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this has been lovely. I mean, honestly, I could just keep talking for hours. But I know you're a very busy man and got lots of things going on. Beautiful baby there to take care of. So we can do this again sometime. And thanks for sharing your beautiful community and your beautiful family with us and everything you've done. So just really appreciate your time and all your wisdom and your passion. So yeah.
Thank you, Brian. I really appreciate your dedication and your wisdom as well. This is what I was sharing right before we got disconnected. Is this recognition of the highest potential in everyone, and then that allows us all to continue working with that.
Yes. Amen. All right. Well, you have a beautiful evening, and we will see you next time.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
And we'll connect soon.
And it's been
okay. Take care, Brian.
Post your in the comments if you have any questions for me or Roman. And yeah, just let us know that you're out there, even if you aren't watching this live and you see it later. If anything comes up from you watching this and you have questions for Roman, it's the best way to do it. So you have direct access to him. So, all right, have a good evening, everyone. Good night. Oh, continue without guests. Oh, how's it going, everybody? I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye now. Thanks for tuning in. It's been a pleasure. Still working out all the kinks with all this stuff, but it's pretty amazing to be able to drop in with somebody in Peru, somebody like Roman. Just really loving talking to to different people and just getting different perspectives. And again, my number one intention with all of this is just exploring my curiosity and figuring out ways that maybe we can do things better, refine some of these practices, share them with each other, and share them with the world. So thank you again, and have a wonderful evening. Ciao.